Good. So thank you everyone for being here this morning. Before we get started for Talmud, we focused this event in particular for the youth, so I wanted to call one of the youth and younger people to see if he wanted to offer the invocation. Anybody want to? If not, we can call somebody else. Let's offer the prayer this morning. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today to work with us on this very important topic. As you saw in the advertisements, we had wanted to in particular invite our young people from the conference we had in November. There was a big response to include and put some emphasis on our young people, because as we go into the future, as young parents and parents to be, this is going to affect them. But we also made it clear that it's also open to everyone, because everyone needs to be a part of this conversation as we go forward. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here this morning. Just a quick housekeeping notes before I get into the agenda and the presentation here. Those of you that may have family members that can't be here today and that are tech savvy or whatnot, we have Tonmin back here that's helping us out. So it is on YouTube, so make sure your hair is combed, because you might be on the internet today. So we're YouTubing this, and this was a request that specifically came from council, that we utilize this platform so that those that can't be here are able to join us. We were in Barstow, California last weekend, meeting with some of our tribal members. We still have about 30 families out there, so we had a pretty good response of folks that came. We had almost 50 people last week in Barstow, so really great. Let your relatives, friends know that it will be on YouTube on the same channel that we used the last time. So with that, today we have an agenda before you. I'll just walk through it quickly. How many of you were able to attend the Hubi Lawns conference in November? Oh, good. It was we have a good group here. Okay, so there's just a couple that were not there. So this first piece of the presentation really was intended for the folks that were not able to attend, so that we can kind of give them a backdrop as to why are we doing this, right? So it's not just splash right into the cold water and then we get information from you. So the first part of the presentation is focused on that. So on your agenda, you see the lifting the blindfold, and we'll still go through that this morning. We'll just take a few minutes on it just to refresh your brains on what the conversation was. And as you recall, that was really informational. We'll take a quick break and then we'll get back to the presentation. The second piece of the presentation, hi guys. The second piece of the presentation then is on the path forward. So as you recall, in November, that presentation was really focused on here's the history, here's what the impact has been, here's what the impact will be going into the future. It's really informational. This go around, council has asked us to say, okay, now go back and ask folks, here's a suggested model, get their feedback. And so what we'll be presenting to you in the next piece, in the second part of the presentation, is the suggested model. But again, that's not the end solution. Again, it's suggested. If you have other ideas, that's what today is about. If you have other scenarios that you think might work, or you want us to take back to council for consideration, that's what we're here for. So, you have the opportunity to do that today. Then what we're going to do is we're going to, after some discussion, we're going to go into some breakout sessions, just small groups, because what we want you to help us be able to do is articulate back to council why this model may be the best model for us, or not. So we're going to go through that process. When we get there, I'll walk through it in a little bit more detail as to what we're looking for from you. So it's important for us as a work group to be able to get the documentation and what your voice is. Not we're just a catalyst, if you will. You're the voice, so we're trying very hard to capture your voice to take back to the council, because at the end of the day, what this effort is leading to is November timeframe of this year. The council will be looking to make a decision on whether or not we should go down the path of a referendum to consider the movement away from blood quantum to an alternative metric. So, and again, we'll walk through those items here as to what we've been able to come up with for consideration in that process. So that's really what today is about. We're going to go ahead and get moving on the presentation here, and as you came in, when you signed in, there were 3 articles out there that we left on the table, and this is just more FYI for you, just to informational things you can read up on, things that we've been looking at. So there's a ton of stuff out there, whether it's on the internet or libraries or whatnot. So I would encourage you to do some digging on your own. The information we're providing you, if you can add to it, or even if you correct us, if maybe there's something we misrepresent or are not clear on it, by all means, please help us out and provide any information you might have. So we're wide open to that assistance. So with that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. Here are our team members that we have right now that's been sanctioned by the council. So this is the group that has been driving the work so far, as assigned by the council. And so Elsie and I serve as the co-chairs. Ed and Gilbert are members of the commission. Alvin has been a part of our commission as an advisor support recently, and the reason we've included Alvin as a part of this is it's been really neat where we've had some of these conversations, a number of elders that have been coming, and that's really interesting. So as a part of that, the ability to use the language, so that's how we've engaged the interpreter. But also for the young people, for those that may not, those of us that are still learning the language, one of the things we've also tried to use this platform for is to maybe teach a word, or 2 or 3, as we go through the presentation. So Alvin is going to help us with that. So there's 2 words that come out today. We're going to share those with you, and so that's how Alvin's going to help us. And just as a sidebar, it was really interesting when we were in Barstow last week, meeting with our relatives there. It's very interesting because here we're working hard to maintain the language, and those kind of things that we have feast days or ceremonies, and for you the language is abundant. We're struggling a bit with the language. And out there, it was interesting to see because there's still a number of people that speak very well. is really good with Luna. And that was neat to see last week. I think Alvin was pleasantly surprised because there was a lot of conversation in the language last week in California. That was pretty cool. And being that they're not exposed to some of the things we have, they found some way to hold on to the language there. So that was pretty inspiring to see. So hopefully, we'll be able to, if anything, some folks walk away with, those of us that are learning, walk away with one or two new words today as we go forward. So with that, let me ask the team here, is there anything you want to add before we start with opening remarks or comments?
Tôi với chị quý sẽ sao vậy chị sẽ cái số phận mình sẽ tỏ về trò quân số em sẽ cho những cái gì tỏ thì trò phải mà cái you know post yet cái gì sai mình nói sẽ cái lệ you know cái gì parcels thì cái trò nếu we shot thì hộp phải sẽ gì cái bed cái bed cái mình cái help us cái we shot thì they send their regards back from Barstow to let you guys know that they're still there, they still think about you, and like Rich was saying just now is that they're really very strong in the ways they're still really strong in doing that. That's Alvin and I with Alvin we're just really surprised because this young man came to us. He talks. So we had to kind of turn around, reshift our thinking as well. But again, there was a lot of good comments. There was a lot of good discussion that took place. And again, going off of what Rich was saying again is that we did again go through a little bit of the who belongs, but how we got to this point in time. And again now, for today, it's again focused around the youth. And again, and thank you, Dawai my you guys are interested in doing these things. Interested that we might want to have to find another avenue to go. Again, like Mr. Larky is saying, is that we're not the ones who are making the decisions. We're just the ones who are researching all of this for you to make the sound decisions on which way we want to move forward with this. So again, just a brief thank you for being here, and I hope that you find this a productive day. Okay.
Good morning. Good Dr. Josh. Guardian Society election. I'll just reiterate what Ed and Rich said. I hadn't spoken Indian for 2 straight days in a long time. I tell you, those Barstow people really did something to us. That's all we did was talk Indian all weekend, last weekend. And when I got home, I tried to continue that with my husband, but he kept mixing it with English. So I told him, go back to our But thank you for all being here today. I hope we can give you the information that you're seeking to help you make a decision on giving us some ideas on what we need to present back to council, because that's our sole purpose of being here today. So if you have any questions, please ask questions, because that's the only way we can help you to decide on what you think the path that the tribe should take. So I hope we have enough information for you to make that decision.
Cái sẽ vô qua tao phải coi đâu ai mai mà pro strada next year one now but you want to improve it okay mà với là sa ít tiền sa okay mà cái khoản chỉ là cái queen ship to see how it's get you to see women ship but yeah, I just want to say thank you for this is a very crucial thing in our tribe now that's happening. We're at a critical stage of, losing our identity as Laguna people. And this is something that we need to focus on very strongly to continue being a Laguna. And as you heard from Mr. Luarki and the rest of the group is, you are our voice. We're not here to dictate. We're not here to make you to say anything. But what you're going to tell us or what you want is we're taking back to the council. And this is your opportunity to do it now. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to make comments. And this is where you'll go. And like one guy guys be man enough and woman enough to make her that's what they say, don't be afraid. Because this is yours. This is your opportunity. And you know, I guess one thing is, how has it affected you? How has it affected you and your family? You know, we're all at that same stage. You know, somehow somebody in our family has been affected, but this is the time and opportunity to bring it out so we can take that back to council. I just want to say thank you again for participating and coming again. You know, you're carrying the weight of all the people here in Laguna. You know, it just might be this many now, but you know, in the future, we'll be blessed by all the comments and suggestions you make for us to take back. Okay, Henry?
So we'll go ahead and go into the presentation here, and I just want to reiterate something Philbert said, which is very important, in that you know, again, we're the gatherers. We're gathering information from you, and I want the environment to be safe. You know, feel comfortable that you can make the comments that you need to, share the information. It's not going to hurt our feelings. You know, if you disagree on a suggestion or whatnot. Again, our purpose here is to gather as much information from you as we can, so that it informs the council the direction that they can take leading up to November on whether or not we want to move in the direction of a referendum. So, I would encourage you to do that. So, that being said, from the first phase, what you saw, and on this piece of the presentation, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, just because the majority of you were there in November. So this is just more of a refresher for you, but also for those that were not able. Hopefully, we can get you all on the same page. So here were the things that we were assigned to do in November, and what we were not assigned to do. So again, leading up to November last year, when we had the Jubilans, it was really informational. It was educational, and this is how we want to frame it, to inform on that piece. So that was our task. And who helped us in that presentation was the group that you see here, but also Lorraine Silva was a huge part of the help, because she helped us with data. And we'll show you one of the slides here that she's helped us with as well going forward. So this is the main slide that has really driven the work of this committee or commission, and why council has made it a critical piece of work this year for the council body. So if you recall, prior to 1940, we had no membership requirements. You were just Laguna. And so when in 1934, there was what was called the Indian Reorganization Act, the IRA. The IRA, as part of a way for tribes to become constitutional tribes and begin to use policy like the federal government more so, the Pueblo chose to be a constitutional tribe. We decided to be a 1934 IRA tribe. In 1940, we saw the census come out, the Pueblo Indian census came out. And that census introduced the initial stages of membership. And in that process, it said that you only had to be half Indian. It didn't say what kind of Indian, it just said half Indian. So again, if you recall, at the Jubilans conference, Ron Sullivan made a pretty neat presentation on his grandfather, James Sullivan. And that James Sullivan was full-blooded Zuni. But because of the 1940 census, on paper, he was Laguna, because he was at least half Indian. So that was the information that was provided who eventually became our governor. And so these were things that it's not unique to Laguna, that these situations arose during that time period. And so Barbara Anaya is here too. She's I'm not going to put her on the spot today, but she's familiar with a lot of this kind of stuff. So if we get stuck on technical pieces, I might call on you. But these are some of the pieces that she works with Lorraine as well. I think most of you know. These are some of the pieces that have triggered this work and the impact that we've had from Blood Quantum over these years. The 1949 Constitutional Amendment incorporated the one-half Indian. So you had to then be one-half Indian to become a Laguna member as a result of the 1949 Constitution. 1958, we had our second constitutional amendment. In that 1958 constitutional amendment, we changed it to one-half Laguna. So you had to be one-half Laguna to be a member. Now, fortunately, or over the years, we've had the opportunity to look at a lot of our older council minutes from that time and what was going on during that time period in our Pueblo. Why did that change happen? And having had the opportunity to interface with former governors like Roland Johnson and Harry Early and the late Tom Daly, late Vicente Pedro, had the opportunity to interface with those guys on this issue. And it was interesting when you converse with them and then you look at the council minutes that were going on during that time frame. The driver behind that 1958 constitutional change from one-half Indian to one-half Laguna really was driven by economics. Right? You all remember the mines were now coming in, and so it was driven by money. So the tighter we could make our membership, the more you're going to get in your wallet. And unfortunately, that's what the driver was. So when you read those older minutes from that time period, what the council was discussing, that was a big piece. And those men I mentioned talked about the challenge that was going on in the community during that time with that conversation. So that was a big influence of what happened. So in 1958, when that constitutional change happened, we had a membership of about 3,240. That was the tribal membership at the time. So one of the things we did as a committee, and again, this is where Lorraine really was a big help to us. We said, from 1959 up to today, if we changed nothing, what would our membership look like? So what that did is, so if we did nothing, from 1959 or 58 up to today, we would have about 2,522 members compared to the 8,800 that we have today, right? But if we, like I said, if we did nothing, that's where we would be. If we projected out at least 30 years, again, doing nothing and left it at one half, at least 30 years out, that 478 number that you see there, that's about how many tribal members we will have eligible. Now, if you think about that 478, at least half of those are not childbearing. Some of those are just going to choose not to have children. So you're going to have a very, very small amount that are eligible for membership. And in order to make sure there's some perpetuation, they would have to have offspring with somebody that's a Laguna member. Right? So it creates a very difficult situation for us going into the future. The other thing that this begins to demonstrate, as you see these numbers, every time we've made a constitutional change, so like in 1984, same thing. In 1984, we removed the we lowered the blood quantum from 1/2 down to 1/4. And the reason that happened was because we're beginning to see a flat line, people not being eligible for membership because they couldn't meet the 1/2 blood quantum. So there was a need to, in order to perpetuate, you had to reduce the blood quantum. But the council also put in, at the time, a 2-year restriction that said if you don't enroll your child within 2 years from the time they're born, you miss that timeline, then you're out of luck. The best you could be is naturalized, even though you met the blood quantum. So that's what happened in 1984. The other challenge that happened in 1984 that probably not many folks know about, and Elsie can talk to this much more intelligently than I can, but on the council side, we've had to deal with this issue. Unfortunately, it's not the first time the issue has risen. The 1958 constitutional change created the same situation. What happened behind the scenes is that the council or the powers that be that work with the council body began to change blood quantum levels for individuals. So we just recently dealt with a situation, you probably heard it in the council or the council minutes when they were presented last year, where we had a situation with a tribal member, their family, they were, from the 1958 time period, they were recognized as 4/4. 1984, this changed. Council and their powers that be made whatever changes in the background and reduced their blood quantum. So this created a whole domino effect, right, for this family. So long story short, the enrollment committees presented this issue. Council eventually made the decision to replenish their blood quantum back to 4/4. So those are some of the challenges that we've seen over the years. But the biggest thing I think that we want to walk away with on this particular graph is that we can change blood quantum amounts, all those kind of things, but it's really just a band-aid. You see the spike and it's going to come back down. You see the spike and it's going to come back down. That's all we're doing is band-aid. So the driver behind this has been in 2012 when we made the constitutional amendment to remove the 2-year restriction. A number of the villages, the majority of the villages came back to the council and said, now that you've done that, we now want you to look at an alternative to blood quantum. So that's where this work started. It wasn't the council that said, we want to go do this. It came from the villages. So this is a perpetuation of that work going forward.
Itu nak kuat ni sih aku mesti kaya 1940 kuat kaya zaman sih ada sih zaman zaman jam kaya macam macam itu tahun itu jadi kaya 1958 aku mesti kena itu bisa nama masih kau masih tak saya mungkin ini tahu saya itu start sistemnya senang ini jadi kau masih itu aja siapa saya sih aku juga itu nak aku kerja saya sih kan way memang sendiri kau ikan mesti cuma sangat komputer sistemnya macam Jawa, cái gì mà hôm nay này cái chuyện qua được xong rồi sẽ qua chỉ mình được cái mà chỉ nói giờ của chúng tôi chỉ hay cái số chúng ta như cái gì không chỉ sao nó cái mà chỉ nói giờ của chúng tôi để cũng khai chuyện số nhiều cũng chỉ có cái này là cái chuyện extra cái 1984, we are doing that. Studio, it's a Chicago, so okay, 1/4 Amazon, it's a share. Okay, and if you get caught, you can say, "Koi kami share it." I play prayer. Yes, and balance. So you can ask you what you care. Apa. It's lots of share me. It's like who creates a great diagram. So patients can shoot lots of things. Say, go ahead and stay out. Lots of shoots lots of things. Each other. They prayers. 1984 borders. Lots of things. So 这些投资者开的这个呢，2012 2 years Ukraine 刚完这个是头一个年的，我们是structure 些是给美国自己嘛，这个市场是给国家部门2012it's a new food security to new ratio you say yeah it's this is the what it's他们跟公司开的可以跟那个我们也是it's a why use it to research use it to research 即我家湾即比西藏啊就是那个是这个基础这个是可以跟那Intrauma怎么给木有些是啥子木有些技术些技术是做的啥嘛这些咱们只有这基础这没什么大事的所以你所以只有啥事就是那咱们要嘛这个那这个不只是这个以及它主要是这个这个后来可以怎么样的？但是嘛，这个我这次嘛，几个木子起来，木子起来就是，几这么嘛，就是上了很多人是在，也嘛这个主要的，这个是主要可以是一个，木水，麻烦是那，这个就那咱那这规矩，这主要可以一个，现在是基础的，嘛这个。Oh yeah, so midnight. Okay, it's a case. That's a month. I say, oh, one late, it's a leg, that's on a lot. That's a slide.
Again, as you heard, all this is all about blood quantum versing lineage and all those models that we're talking about. So again, we did this at Barstow as well, and I was asked to also come up with a word for the day. You guys already kind of know the word for blood, right? Madzi, lineage. How many of you guys know the word for lineage? Maybe a word for lineage, or maybe a phrase maybe that you might want to relate it to. Anybody know? When you think about lineage, who you're connected to. When you try to think about that word, from where your family, where you're connected to, that's basically the word I would say for lineage. So start thinking about those words.
So for those of you that came in late, there's a couple that maybe missed our opening remarks. So as we're trying to use the language in this process, we're going to pull out certain words that are being used in the conversation. So if you want to write them down in your own phonetic way or talk to these guys afterwards, feel free to do that. So moving on, to give you just a high-level view of the changes that have been made over the years as it relates to blood quantum. As you see, in 1908, we had no membership requirements for yeomen. 1949, we accepted the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act. This is where the 1/2 came from the 1940 census roll as well. So the 1949 Constitutional Amendment, the First Amendment, incorporated any Indian blood language into our Constitution. 1958, that evolved from any Indian blood to 1/2 Laguna blood, so we became very specific to Laguna blood in 1958. The other thing that was important to point out in the 1958 Constitution was that the born out of wedlock was imposed during that time period, but it only applied to the male. So we've not been able to find any documentation as to why it was only the male and not the female. So I'm not sure why it was structured as such. 1984 amendment, we saw the lowering of the blood quantum from 1/4 or 1/2 down to 1/4. and the introduction of the 2-year restriction. So, and this is also when the paternity decree was introduced during the 1984 constitutional amendment. And then in 2012, we saw the change of removing the 2-year restriction from the Constitution. So this is just a quick snapshot of the timeline of the significant changes that were made to our Constitution and membership. This particular slide talks to a specific section on membership in our Constitution. So this is our current Constitution, Article 2, membership. And it's specific to Section 3, powers of the Pueblo Council over membership. This is an important one because later on in the presentation I'll touch on this as well. The Pueblo Council shall have the sole authority to determine eligibility for enrollment as a member of the Pueblo. No decree of any court according to determine membership in the Pueblo, paternity or degree of Laguna Indian or other blood shall be recognized as determinative of membership in the Pueblo. Meaning, we can have our enrollment, you can fill out your blood quantum stuff, you can do all this, but at the end of the day, the council can say, we're going to decide this way. So that's the authority that the Constitution gives the council. So, and our Constitution is not unique in this. We've had Professor Hershey from the University of Arizona Law School has been working with us on this, and he's shared with us over 200 plus constitutions. There's a ton of them. What's interesting is this particular language is really like an IRA language. So you see almost verbatim in other tribal constitutions this same power that's given to the council. So if enrollment can come in with all their packet and here's what qualifies this person or disqualifies the person, the council can say, we're still going to allow this person to be a member. Council can deny someone from, what's it called? They leave the tribe. Relinquish. They can decline relinquishment. So they have that authority within the Constitution. So, like I said, we'll touch on this later as we go through and we think this is going to apply. Other elements that come in to conversation, we've all heard here in the community, the conversation about naturalized members. And naturalized members, what benefits do they have? Right now, everyone says that naturalized members have none. We're wrong. This ordinance that was passed in 1959, and it's never been rescinded, gives naturalized members of the council and leadership the opportunity to take them through a, probationary period. Once they finish their probationary period, they call it a conditional member at the time, naturalization ordinance, may acquire full rights to Pueblo financial benefits and land assignments after such person has gone through the probationary period of 5 years. This was passed in 1959. The dilemma this creates is, has council since 1959 been in violation of our own law? We have. Naturalized members have rights. So these are the things that that we've needed to research to be able to put in front of you to say, folks, here's, maybe we as a whole community have ignored this. And how do we fix that? So that's part of this work. The other piece of this is domestic relationships. So we also saw that 1958 time period, although it's not part of the Constitution or ordinances, when you look at the council minutes from that time period, and I need to get a copy so I can put it up here as well. There's a set of council minutes that also talk to the I guess how you say it, the non-recognition or the time the council chose not to recognize traditional marriages any longer. So we devalued our own system in acceptance for someone else's. right? So the domestic relations, San Ildefonso Pueblo is a good example right now. They actually have their own ordinance that recognize tribal marriages or traditional marriages. And the state of New Mexico, because it's an ordinance, recognizes them as a legal state marriage. So it's going to be important that we think about these kind of things because, again, later on in the conversation, what does this mean when maybe we have a tribal member that marries a non-tribal member? How does this work in? What does that mean to membership? Right? So it introduces some very different dynamics for us to consider going forward. So at the end of the day, on this piece of the presentation, the first phase again was informational to say, do we want to continue with blood quantum? If we do, we look at that red arrow, and we can all see where we're going to end up. If you recall back to the assimilation, the termination policy that the federal government had in place many years back, really to do away with us, we're doing it better than they did. We're doing their job for them. If you look to the right, to the lineage, that's the model we suggest that we consider moving forward with. And these are some of those reasons. It's inclusive versus exclusive. It perpetuates our existence. It's more value-driven. The decision belongs to us. And so it grows us instead of terminates us. So we're at a very critical juncture. As Gilbert mentioned in his opening comments, we're at a very critical juncture in the decisions and how we go forward. So this first phase, first piece of the presentation was just really to try to get everybody back in the same sheet of music to refresh your memories from the November presentation and to stage us for the next piece of the presentation where we want your feedback on the potential model. So before we go to that potential, or the next piece of the presentation, let me ask Alvin if he wants to add any comments on it. No comments on it, but let's go ahead and see if there's any questions or discussion on this piece before we jump into the next part. Again, this is a large number of you attended the presentation in November, so we might have some additional thoughts since November that you want to share. Or maybe there's just something brand new that popped up this morning. So let me open the floor for any comments or suggestions you might have before we go to the next one. And just one sidebar, all these little notepads that are out there, if you have ideas or thoughts, notes that you could share with us, maybe you don't want to get up and speak, I would ask you to please write them down and share them with us that way. So again, just another way to capture your voice. So, any questions, comments, thoughts on this first phase? Yes. Everybody heard her question? So her question was on the naturalized members. Does that now mean that naturalized members can get access to distribution, to land assignments, to the home, to basically to benefit? That's what you're asking. So based on that ordinance, the easy answer would say yes.
When does their 5-year probation start? When you're born and you're an adult?
So I think where her question was, so when does the probation period start? And I think that's where the downfall in this ordinance happened. I don't know that they've created any policy that now tells you that how do you do this, right? So because we have a Meruma's ordinance that talks to land assignments and property and that kind of stuff, but there's nothing else that talks to the process of how this ordinance gets executed. So I think that's where the gap is, and that's probably why it was not implemented. But when you look at it just on face value, The easy answer is yes. The how, I don't think we figured out yet.
I'm wondering how many naturalized members or parents of naturalized members do know this? And the commission was so that far back that I don't think it's doing to them now.
And that's part of the problem, and that's why this is important, you know, to be able to try to educate the community on it, because it's also introduced within the different villages. And again, this is another reason we made a conscious decision not to go to individual villages, because you have different perspectives, and then you end up having to manage those different expectations, because this really touches the whole problem. So, but to your point, a village example, and I'll use Parahi just because, you know, I've been a village officer there, and I've seen some of the processes we've used there. So to your question on land, we've had 2 tribal members, or not 2 non-tribal individuals that were married to tribal members. There's both of them, both cases, their spouse passed on. One was a non-native, the other was a Navajo that was married to a tribal member. Both those gentlemen, they were at ditch work, public work, village meeting, and they were in better standing than most Lagunas. What the village agreed to and the Uchini agreed to was that we cannot give them the land assignment, but we can give them the property. So we allowed them to stay in the home. So, but that's a village decision, right? You know, so we've done things like that. You know, so I think again that demonstrates, because there's a lack of policy, there's not consistency in how this will get applied. So, okay, did I answer your question? Okay. Cody?
Just to help clarify, because I work with the enrollment office and I've been there for about 19 years now. Can you hear me back there? No? Okay, so I work with the enrollment office. My name is Barbara Anaya, and to help try and clarify the questions, enrollment can be tedious, like with the 5-year probation period. How that is clarified is if you're an adult, which is the age of 18, and you apply for membership, then you have to serve a 5-year probation period before you can become a tribal member. So that goes back to all the codes, and at the time was ordinances. So if you're looking for the codes, they do have the Muni code on the POL website. That's where I was able to find some of the benefits that the naturalized members receive. So right now, naturalized tribal members can't receive the direct education scholarship because it's stated in the Partners for Success right there on the line. It's only for regular members, but you have to meet the other qualifications. Naturalized members aren't able to vote, and that states now in the election code. So you have to go to the Muni code to look at all the codes there. They're not allowed to own livestock, and that's in the Natural Resource Code. In the Manumas Code, they're not allowed to have a land assignment issued to them. That's all in code. Through the natural resources, however, they are allowed to have a wood harvesting permit to go after wood. And I found somewhere in their taxation administration, they have referenced them in there also. But they are able to receive housing, and I think that's because the money comes from grants, right? And just the permitted hunting and recreation to be out on lagoon lands and the wood gathering is what they receive. But the others, where it stated how it was up there, that's what our question was with the enrollment office, was what benefits do they receive? And then it says in one area where you flip the paper and all there was a blank page. Nothing was ever written. Now at this time, it's where the programs had to write something and put it into those policies. So it is written, you just have to look for it all in code.
Thank you, Barbara. And I think Barbara points out something very important and why this process that we're going through is so very critical. You heard the huge contradiction of the benefits that are not available, but we never
rescinded the ordinance. So these benefits, what we're saying that they can't have, violates our law. So there's a huge contradiction. Unfortunately, this is not the only situation we have. If you look at our Constitution, it's contradictory, right? So it creates those challenges. So that, again, that's why this conversation and this feedback is so very important, because if this goes down the path of a referendum, constitutional changes have to be made to this. So what Barbara's talking about, what's up here, we can try to get into some alignment and consistency. Yes, ma'am.
So it sounds like the mayor almost have more say-so or decision-making in the tribal council. The Lansing says that the other the Lansing, but the mayor wants to do
So her question was, it sounds like the Merumas in each of the villages have more authority over land than the council does in the village jurisdiction. And the answer is yes. The Merumas within the village jurisdiction have authority to assign only 2 assignments. They can do agricultural assignment and a residential assignment. That's it. Leases and like where we're standing right now, the council has the authority. Anything else, although this is in a village jurisdiction, this is in Brahi village jurisdiction, the council had to get authority from the village to use this land. So, but then the council then can turn around and lease it to the entity. Places like just west of the Route 66, where those trailers and houses are, the staff officers have responsibility for anything outside of the village jurisdiction. So the staff officers have the authority to make those kind of decisions. So that's where that piece comes in. But yes, in the village, it is the Merumas that have the authority. Outside of village jurisdiction, it's the staff officers. And if it's a lease, it's the council. Yes, yes, sir.
Thanks, Joe Mattel, Ray Crawford. My question is, those houses that the Van Nuys occupy down by Route 66, west of Route 66, right? What village actually played a role in that as far as land assignment? Was there actually land assignments made there, or was that land on a lease basis?
You'd have to blame Governor Early. That happened during his administration, during the Governor Early's administration. The Van Nuys, who are from Casablanca, made that request. But at the end of the day, the staff officers, the governor and his staff, make the decision as to whether or not. So it's a regular land assignment. It's not a lease, it's a regular land assignment. So that's how that happened. Are there any other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cheryl Henry. I'm from the Siama village. And I know there was a question back here regarding naturalization. I was enrolled, I'm half Navajo and half Laguna. My mother is Laguna, my father is Navajo. And I was naturalized, let's say about like, I was naturalized about I'll say like in 2007. And what I was told was that I had to go on probation for about 5 years. And it was up to the Merumas to authorize me to become fully naturalized to get into the Pueblo. So after 2 years, what my Merumas did back then was they wrote to the enrollment office and it went before I believe council, and they went ahead and naturalized me. But what I was told by some of the village officers was that, same thing, I couldn't own land, I couldn't vote, and more or less I felt like I had a green card. And it was bothersome because I was participating in a lot of village activities, and all those others that were regular members, they were nowhere around. And even like today, when you look at this room, there's only a handful of us. And it's discouraging. And this impacts our future. And if we don't do something now, you know, like I mentioned in my survey at 66, you know, Laguna's going to be once upon a time. And what I've been told by my grandmother, by my mother, even on the Navajo side, whoever your mother is that's who you are. And that's the way I look at myself. Although I'm half Navajo, half Laguna, you know, I'm still full Native. Currently today, I'm natural, I'm not naturalized, regular member. And I'm proud of who I am. And I'm here, you know, because I care what happens to the Pueblo in 20, 25 years. And, you know, we need to do something. We need to change something, even if it's just a handful. And I just want to thank, you know, everybody sitting up there that, you know, put this meeting on because, you know, it's informative. And like what I've heard, you know, and that's exactly what I was thinking, you know, our ordinances between the Mirumas, natural resources, they're all contradicting each other. And that has to change, you know, to be in line. So, you know, that's how I became, you know, I went through that process with the Mirumas, and they wrote a letter to the enrollment requesting that I become fully naturalized, and that's how I got off my probation. And the other thing I want to mention is that the enrollment office, they know who's all coming in as being naturalized. And one thing that I think that could be helpful, coming from somebody that's an adult person coming into the tribe, is to have an orientation on what's expected, what's going to be in good standing, and what needs to be done. Because, you know, when I came in, I didn't even know what the staff officer, you know, was for. You know, I had to learn these things on my own. So orientation would really help. And, you know, that's just a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Nita. That's really important. One of the things that she points out, and again, this is why this conversation is important. So Barbara talked about the probation and that piece that starts when the applications and the enrollment process starts. But then you come to the village level and then they put you in another probation. So you have contradictory probations potentially going on, right? So those are things that we need to fix. The other piece is, you know, rethinking good standing. What does that mean? You know, back then, maybe years back, it probably meant how we still interpret it today. You're helping at ditch work, you're coming to village meetings, you're all those kind of things. But with introduction of things like this, like the casino, a lot of our people are employed at the casino. Their busiest nights are Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. People are at work, right? So it impacts your ability in some instances for individuals because they have to go to work. Some work nights, can't make village meetings. Some are at work right now. We have a tribal member right here from our village. He's here at work, but we have ditch work going on. So, but he has to feed his family. So we have to figure out how do we fix those contradictions, right, going forward. So I think these are going to be really important discussions as we move down this path on membership, because it's going to have a trickle effect, like I said earlier, or a domino effect in other policies and ordinances going forward. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment mainly about I can't understand why it's taken this long for council or I don't want to just totally blame council, but people in general, why it took so long to take a look at that article that did not give these people what's rightfully theirs as Laguna people. That's something I can't understand, why it took so long because I know that I've worked about maybe 30 years with the tribe, and I know that these people that are not yet recognized or that are naturalized, I've known for a long time that they were not eligible. When I worked at Natural Resources, I couldn't give them hunting permits. They're not allowed to hunt. It was not till recently that they could be given a wood permit. I mean, a wood permit, come on. You know, this is so ridiculous. Are we so dense or so? It just upsets me that this went on. This has been going on for years. That, come on, council, wake up. You know, look at what you're doing to your people. Even this thing about the 2-year wait. If the parent does not enroll their child within 2 years, who suffers? It's the child. Because of the, what do you call it, whatever you want to call it, the stupidity of the parent, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word, but because the parent hesitated to enroll their child, now their child suffers. I think that is another thing that needs to be looked at. You know, that waiting period, because the children are suffering, and yet they're eligible for enrollment, but because of the parents' lack of whatever, the children are suffering. We've got many children out there that were not enrolled within the 2-year period. So if we could take another look at that. Also, I just wanted to make a comment about what you said about the people in Marshall, California. Well, myself and Linda Lucero, we were raised out in Richmond, California, and people call us boxcar babies because basically that's what we lived in, was modified boxcars. And the people in Marshall, we were very good. We had a good relationship with the people in Richmond, California. And one thing that I can't understand, and maybe it's because, I guess it's because mainly on my upbringing, I can speak fluent Laguna, and yet I was raised hundreds of miles away from the reservation. We still had we had corn dances out in Richmond, California. Mountains are far away to get the haka, but the men made that journey so we didn't have war chiefs, but we had a governor. And we were not far from our traditions. And I was glad that you brought it up about the Marshall people because they were the same way. They were in the same boat that we were in. They were also boxcar babies. My brother Kenneth Army, boxcar babies in Winslow. So they were these colonies. And it was hard. We had to live out in California and the cost of living was very high. But somehow we made it. And I'm just really proud to say that I'm glad that I was brought up the way I was. I had a very good childhood, and my parents taught us the values of being who we are as Lagunas. And yet, when we came back to the reservation, when my dad retired from the railroad after 40 years, I came back to New Mexico and met people that didn't speak Laguna. And yet they were raised here on the reservation, and they still don't speak. So I just wanted to bring that up because my parents spoke to us every day in our native language. And separate people, we all ate together. And that's when my dad used to, I guess people would say, preach to us. He would tell us this is the way of our people. And I tell you this at mealtime, so you can take it in. That was his belief. But thank you, that's what that's the comment I wanted to make, and thank you for bringing it up about the Barstow people. I really appreciate it because the Richmond people and the Winslow people were all in the same boat. And we don't mind if you call us boxcar babies. We're really proud of that.
Thank you, Naya. You know, she has some really good, I think, comments there. And, you know, one was, why did it take so long? But I think part of the answer to that is maybe council didn't even know to ask that question. It's something, or even the community, even the community know to ask that question. The former secretary, Frank Cerno, was the one that did the research on this and found this information for us, so that's where we were able to get it. Now that we know it, we can't ignore it. Right? So we have to figure out how do we utilize this, because it impacts naturalized members. And you're right, and both of you are right, and I think Cheryl's comments are right as well. It's unfair in many instances, you know, and you're right. You can get wood, but nothing else. You know, it's not that there's no Laduna, right? So I think it's really important as it relates to Barstow or Winslow or Germany, wherever we have Ladunas. Again, that's why we also made this commission make the effort to go out there, because we know that there's still a pretty good population. I was still serving as governor. They invited me out there to speak to them, so that's how I was aware of it. There's about 30 families that are still out there. But I think when you serve in these roles, you don't have the luxury of picking and choosing who you serve. Wherever there's Ladunas, that's who you serve. Okay? So that's why we want to hear their voice, and so it's important. And thank you for those comments as well, Cheryl as well. Thank you for your comments. Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope you have a good morning today. Thank you, Governor. I get torn whether I should speak in Laguna or whether I should speak in English.
I would encourage you to use both.
But I did serve under you, and in 2011, I became a councilwoman in 2010 and 2011. I served under John Antonio. He was ending his term, and Richard was just beginning his term. And both did not speak Laguna. Sadik Kawa, Asia Kapa. Asia Kay Bispad, Nabi Sehova, Katsia. And he has very Hunama, Elvin, but you should, you know, you should interpret it. Asia where I was young, Cairo. Say where she survived. To what then of where? Nên nó cả sự khắc sắc của quý tàu quá ấy ta tu của phụ trần đi in not why you situation. I'm fluent in the language as well. I speak 2 different dialects. I'm Kingwa, I'm part from up north, so I kind of understand those kind of. I'm at our hope, you know, that kind of. We have to think on what kind of there. But I am very concerned about this language. You know, I knew that it was born because I didn't have any of my officials even at the village being fluent enough to speak to the people. And then we have our Indian ways where we should be reading our Asana, and then our hope is that many of those that participate, men or women, that they will be fluent in the language. And say, I had a very heated discussion with one of the religious leaders, and I pleaded, please make an effort to learn your language so that you can pray. And I'm very proud of those that are here, the younger ones, because you're the next generation that are going to have to pick up the language. It's not me. I'm on the waning side. You know, when you pass over 50, you're going down. But my concern is that we are losing a language. I went to your November and all these other in-between sessions. I was a language speaker, spoke under, or was teaching with Mr. Irvich Aosi from Mesita. We were trying to do it both male and female. And we were also gauging or trying to, how do you say, speak nothing but the language. Even from the time you come to the door and come into the classroom setting, we were trying to gauge it to where it would just be the Laguna language. This is what our intent was. We couldn't get very far because it was already too much where they had lost a lot of the things that needed to be taking place. But I still, how do you say, have my concern. A lot of this orientation, like this, Cheryl is from over at my village, over at Philadelphia, and I know her mother, Florence, very well. She was very much a speaker of the language. But we also are very much losing our elders that are very fluent where we can hear it. First you have to hear it. Then you can, how do you say, mimic, I guess you might want to say, so that you know how it's pronounced. The guttural sounds, the nasal sounds of some of these words. Okay, we don't all meet up to that, but at least it's an attempt to start to learn our language again. As you know that all the days in the family is gone, but they were very fluent. Mr. Ayue, John Sarcino, Mr. Joe Day, and Wilbur Day now is gone. So I might be there trying to learn the language again because I don't have very much relatives that speak on a daily basis. At least with Mr. Day, we spoke, we addressed each other, we prayed, and then we discussed our activities or whatever was needed to be discussed on a daily basis. But I thank you, Commission, for stepping up to the plate. I worked with Ed at the Rainbow, right? And he was very good because he was the one person that I could depend on to speak to me in our language. And I know Alvin and Gilbert as well. So I feel that you have a good task force. And Elsie, I know she was a teacher. That she spoke. So I have faith in that it will go forward. And I hope that you become very, very fluent in all the facets of health, land, everything that the words need there in Laguna. But I thought I would speak up because I didn't want to, try to be quiet and just kind of take in and soak in how can I help, how can I be assisted. So I'm starting to go back to the Siyama meetings. There are some things that I need to still take care of. But what's her name over here from Barstow, Pat? Thank you. Dawae. Kunama at Yushichanishi, because my folks are out there too. They were out there in Barstow. They were box people. And they came back home, still fluent in the language and the traditions. So I don't think it was very much lost out there. In fact, I think they embraced it and they didn't want to lose contact, so they still carried a lot of things out. John was part of that boxcar generation, John Antonio and his family and sisters. So this is where I'm still, how do you say, I have enlightenment that it still will go on. If you have only a few, it will happen. We are a few here. I know that there's dances going on in both Siyama and I guess over here in Parahi, so I don't know. But I will try and be as participating in these setups that you have. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, and I think what Eloise is talking about is important because when we go down the deeper conversation on belonging and being a part of the tribe, and as Anaya Pat points out, the strength of the language in places other than here, that's an identifier. That's a qualifier. And it's interesting because, and like I said earlier, that environment to be safe, but to also be encouraging. you know, because we have young people that can't speak, you know, we have older people that can't speak. So it's not just the kids, it's grandmas and grandpas that can't speak either. So we have to make sure that we're encouraging, not discouraging people. Even if it's one word, you know, try one word. You know, and Alvin, you know, I give Alvin a heck of a lot of credit because he constantly reminds, at least within the council line, you know, try. You know, so it's really important. And I think also when we look at belonging and membership, and maybe it goes to Cheryl's question earlier, or comment, if there's some type of orientation or things like that happen, is language a part of that orientation? You know, here's maybe something as simple as greetings or introducing yourself. That becomes part of that process. You know, so you know, I think it goes back to that whole idea of whether it's language, whether it's our behaviors that define how we belong. It goes back to that old saying of it takes a village to raise a child. It takes all of us, not just one of us. It takes all of us to work together. And so included, especially in our type of community where faith, whether it's our traditional, whether it's going to church or whatever, is a very important element of our community. So, you know, I've always been of the thought process that, you know, the spoken language is for us as human beings. What comes from your heart is for the spirit. The spirit can understand anything, so I would encourage, however you pray. You know, I would encourage that because that's going to help whisper too in what we're doing, you know, as a community. One of the things to think about in belonging, we'll touch on it part of the presentation as an example of what one of the other tribes was doing. But the Maori, that came to mind when Eloise was talking, the Maori, you know, here we talk about, well, the language is for us, it's for our community. The Maori in New Zealand, their philosophy is we want everybody to learn the language, whether you're Maori or not. Because if you can understand our language, you're going to understand our thinking and who we are as a people. You'll understand our worldview. So they don't limit it to just Maori people. They teach anybody that can learn the language. So again, when we look at, many of you know, probably the older folks in the room, we all grew up with Hansi. You know, Hansi spoke the Laguna very well. You know, and so I think those are things that there's evidence that it can be learned. It can be learned. So, do you have any other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if this is actually my comment on this, but you know, we can go off on this talk and policies and procedures and everything, but it really comes down to the parents of the children and the grandparents, because we need to tell our children. My grandma used to tell us, marry your own people. Of course, when we were to boarding school, I married Acoma, so my children weren't able to become members at the time because they weren't half. And so that's when I realized what she was saying. But we need to tell our children, marry or have children with somebody that's your own people, or at least one of the pueblos now, because we're all in this situation of losing our people. And it's true, the government had a plan to get rid of us, and we're doing it. We're doing it to ourselves. So it's important that as grandparents and as parents, we teach our young people, be selective of who you're going to have children with, because you're the ones responsible for saving our people. It's the young people that are responsible for saving our people by choosing the right person to have children with, to become members. If not, if they marry outside the pueblo, if they're not full-blooded, which they probably aren't, because a lot of us marry outside the pueblo, their children may not be unless we go to something like the lineage. There's some little kids that I know of that whose grandparents were governors, staff officers, and they're not even members because of the blood quantum. And a lot of the young people are different pueblos, or non-pueblo, non-Indian. And so their children are going to have a hard time becoming members unless we go by lineage. But it's really up to us as parents and grandparents to tell our children,
be selective when you have children because you're responsible for saving the people. And it's that important. It's that important for them to know this. I mean, because of this, I don't have any grandchildren. I tell my boys, when you have children, make sure it's a full-blooded Laguna girl. That's the only way your children are going to be recognized. Well, I don't have any grandchildren because they went away to school, they went to college, no Lagunas. So I don't have any grandchildren. But it's that important to me that I told them that. And it's important that the young people know this because they don't know, they just do, you know? Nobody guides them or directs them, it seems like. We're not strict anymore like how we were raised with real discipline. But it's important that as young parents and grandparents that we relay this message. My grandma used to tell me, marry your own people. Now I know what she was saying and why she was saying it. Of course I didn't listen, but now I know, I now understand what she meant. So as this conversation goes on, I always hear that, marry your own people, because that's what's going to save our people. And it's not going to be by blood quantum, it's going to have to be by lineage. It's going to have to be by lineage. That's my comment on that.
Thank you very much for that. You know, I think those are the conversations that's above our pay grade, but I think those are the conversations that need to happen within communities and within families. Because the challenge we run into in this current day and age, you look at a tribal member, maybe has offspring with a naturalized member. And if the tribal member is only 1/4, your child's not going to get a member. That's the danger of blood quantum. Right? And that's, you know, that's the other part that becomes a danger is that, you know, my son's here, I can't tell him who to fall in love with. You know, and I think that puts, that's a difficult one, but I think that comes down to a family conversation. You know, no policy, no legislation can govern how that happens. That's a family decision. But, you know, I think those are things that families will have to consider as we go through this process. You know, even, you know, me as an example, you know, growing up, my grandfather was from Zuni, and some of you know my grandfather. And growing up, we spent so much time in Zuni that, you know, I probably knew more Zuni than I did Laguna growing up, just because I had the benefit of knowing my great-grandmother who didn't speak English at all. You know, so I heard Zuni a lot growing up. So, but up to 1984, I was not a member, because I'm only 1/4 Zuni. So it creates these kind of situations, right, for a lot of people, and I'm not unique. So I think those are things that we need to think about when we're going through this whole process of membership, because it eventually impacts our constitutional changes, our ordinances, all those kind of things. Right? So it becomes real important.
But I think there was a difference between the young that we have now in our day and age. We were constantly being told, so what did we do? We went somewhere else to find someone to marry because we thought we weren't related. I did that. I'm a product of that, going to Akamai and marrying someone else, but lo and behold, after we got married, which I never asked the question before I got married, was I found out that we were clan related. I'm big son, he's little son. So I married my son. But nowadays, I think that we're not as forceful on that anymore, so that our children now are going out and marrying others, you know, because I still am. I'm constantly telling my granddaughter, that's your relative. That's a Leon. Don't be looking at him. That's your blood relative. That's your clan relative. Because that was drilled into me when I was growing up. But I see that a lot of parents nowadays don't enforce that anymore. So hopefully her friend now is not clan related or blood related. Him?
Like Ann, like how she said, I know my parents said the same thing to me too, you know, about marrying into your own blood, Laguna. Okay, so I tell my kids the same thing.
You need to marry somebody that's Laguna. If you don't marry anybody that's Laguna, well, your kids are gonna be half, and then their kids are gonna be quarter, and so on. I said, but that's gonna be your fault because I told you to marry in our own, you know. And like right now, I have gathering of the nations. All my grandkids, my great grandkids, they're all mixed, you know. So, you know, it's their problem, you know. And I told them that because, you know, we need to be at least Laguna. But I know they're married to Indians, you know, but still yet, you know, that's how it goes. It's their fault. We tell them, but who listens? They don't listen, you know. So that's all I have to say. Mhm.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well this morning. It's kind of cool. I'm looking. Oh, okay. I'm looking around at all that is here, and it's like 1% of the people that should be here. And I go to, Eloise has always reminded me to go to these meetings, and I see the same people here all the time. My question is, how can we get more of our people to come to these sessions? We speak to the choir because all of us know that we should be marrying, you know, Laguna members. But you look at them, my generation is the last full-blood generation. You look around at married couples after ours, they're half, most of them, their partners have. So how do we get more of our people to come to these sessions so they know what's happening? Because when you go out and you say, there was this meeting about lineage, there was this meeting about language. Oh, well, they're gonna, oh, whatever. And then they get mad when they come and say, well, we're going to, you know, reduce our blood quantum. Oh, how come we're doing that? Everybody, we're not going to get enough money. We're not going to get this. We're not going to get that. But you know, I want more of our tribal members to come to these meetings. This is important. Even our relatives, your children should be here. My niece, my nephews, they should be here listening to this because they're the ones that are not married members. I know I told my niece all this time, marry an Indian, marry an Indian, marry a Laguna. She goes, every time I look at somebody, they're my relative. You know, and then I go, well, what about him? Oh, he's clan. And she's going, oh, well, who am I going to marry? You know, and that's true. So we do have to look at our future, but our children need to know this. And we don't have that many here. I really encourage you all to somehow get this information out to the people so that we can have more members coming to these meetings. I sent this out to my brothers and sisters who are not here. And they're encouraging. They say, I'm glad people, you know, somebody's looking into this and giving us the information. I mean, we're speaking to the choir about our kids and our family learning the language too. How many of us sit at the table anymore? How many of us have grandparents or even as a grandparent can speak. My granddaughter is learning more Navajo than she is Laguna. And she's more Laguna than Navajo. I don't know, I'm so glad that we have the people here and this committee here doing this, but I really encourage the committee to get the word out. Let us get our family members here so that they know what's going on. I mean, it's saddening that our tribal members aren't really concerned about this until it affects them. Then they will start complaining and yelling and doing everything else. When they've had a chance to come to these and voice their opinion, their concerns, and ask their questions. But I encourage the young people here, and me too, to learn our language and sit down when family comes around at the table and discuss them. Even the very few words you know, salt, pepper, spoon, fork, or pass me this or pass me that. That's what we do when my family comes home. And my granddaughter throws in her Navajo words with her Laguna words, and we're looking at her, what did you say? And she looks at us like, you should know, you know, but it's really enlightening to see her learn 2 languages. And it's fun teaching her. Eloise here helps me when my grandson and my granddaughter are here. And I think we could get other family members, our family members, to help in that way also. But thank you, committee members, and thank you, people, for being here. I encourage you to come to more meetings and bring somebody with us the next time we have a meeting. And continue your hard work. I know it's not easy. Thank you very much.
It's not the extraction should be well, fix it up this time. There was just a lot of you that brought up about marrying into different tribes and stuff like that, and the language. You know, I mean, kind of think about it. You know, if you're going to use language as a way of getting more Laguna people to be Lagunas, I mean, I encourage you guys to speak, because, I don't know, I mean, the majority of the people here in Laguna go from nuances to it. I mean, to speak the language, then maybe that they can use that as becoming a Laguna tribal member. I don't know, that's up to you people. But if that's going to happen, I encourage each and every one of you to start speaking our language. Amen. I know each and every one of you can speak our language. I know you guys can speak it. I always say this every time I speak about this. Why don't we speak it? Are we afraid of our language, or are we ashamed of it? You, it's up to you as an individual. Why you don't speak it? I mean, it's encouraged every time. I say it all the time. You know, like Rich said, tell the councilman, that's expected of us. Sometimes we hear in the village meetings, I mean, we have to be truthful and say no. I mean, that's kind of embarrassing. And I try to tell the guys, speak, speak. You might not pronounce it right, but you know, at least you're trying. That's the only thing. If you guys are afraid of being criticized for speaking our language, don't be. I'm pretty sure they grew up the same way. Fluent speakers, amen, don't be making fun of others that they can't speak right or don't pronounce the words right, tell them how to say it. Teach them right. And you, as learners, may stand to be corrected or kind of, corrected as how to pronounce it. You know, and don't get discouraged by that. I have a personal, that's kind of personal wife. She doesn't speak it fluent, but she understands. Her reason was just because of that. When she was growing up, she was trying to speak our language. Her uncle laughed at her. And right there, she said, no, I'm not going to try and speak our language anymore. I have a heart. I speak to her at home. She answers. But, you know, that's something that, you know, we need to stop that. You know, we're one of our people. I want a lot of you guys to speak our language. And like Rich said, when we went to Barstow, I was surprised, and that kind of touched me, you know what I mean? I said, hey, you guys are way out here. And you guys still speak our language. That's good, keep it up. Now, I wish a lot more of us here on the reservation could speak. Like I said, we might use that as being tribal members. I don't know. It's, again, like I said, up to you guys, but you know. And that's just one thing that, you know, I mean, and there's Laguna POV, okay, a website. The council put that up. Okay, it's there, and it's just a tool. There's other people around that can help you speak the language. You know, as far as you guys really are interested in learning, I don't know for why. I mean, you see those other northern pueblos, they speak fluent, the little kids. I mean, Lagunas, we don't. Why? Si traino uno, sé como sai si strazzi agnet, o henya koi kam shuota wiki. Henya, aywa you koi kam esto, mo henya katsa strazzi ashenia. These are some of the things that some of the other Pueblos look at, you know. They understand when you speak your language, they know where you're from. Same way with us, when we go up north or to another Pueblo, or even if they come here and they speak their language, we know where they're from. That's just kind of the way it is, you know. I mean, we need to do that. Let's tell people, show people where we're from. Be proud of where we're from. We might not have everything, but you know, it's nice to live here. And it's good that, you know, we have these things that are provided for us. And like Volume brought up, you know, I mean, we tend to always kind of say, well, I don't get this, I don't get that. You know, and we come to, we have these things, and like she said, you know, now's the time to bring it out. That way it'll be taken back to council. Us, these guys, and I'm just here just to help out, okay? I'm not a member of the committee. These guys, I know they're trying to recruit me, but you know, I'm kind of giving them a hard time. So, but you know, these guys will take it back to council and let them know. And you know, this is what the people want. And hopefully, you know, they'll understand and do as you wish, you know, but these are some of the things. And another thing is, I hear a lot of this, and I don't like it personally. Charis. See, so what does charis mean? From what they told me is it's just like categorized as far as what we speak. No, we don't speak charis. Well, go away, come in your stratza. Tashi your stratza. Sounds on charis, stratza. You see it? I don't even know if it's a Spanish word or German or whatever, I don't know. And they categorize you as that. Yeah, but I'm not that. I'm a Laguna, Koikames. I'm a Koikames, that's a Ashir. You know, these are some of the things that, you know, I mean, I hope I didn't offend anybody. It's not my intent, but, you know, my because maybe we might go that way. And if our kids speak the language, you know, they might be recognized as Laguna. I don't know, If that doesn't happen, at least we'll still be able to talk our language. It's a minatratsia, who's new Asia. You try, it's all done. Try. Who done? Or Moomers do not keep straight. Matzi. I know the majority of us know what matzi means. And we're hard to Scott to lineage. These are some of the things you can try to. You know, I'm there. If you guys need help, I'll help you. I'm not going to laugh at you. I'm going to try and teach you as best way I can. And just kind of throw another thing, just me and Charles Punch on Wednesday evenings down in Mesita, west of LII. Yeah, there's a trailer sitting back there every Wednesday evenings from 5 to 7. We're there to whoever wants to learn how to speak the language. Come down or talk. We've got a few people that come here regularly and they're starting to talk our English, which is nice. But it's just all, just in case they go that way, they may watch strong, we were strong. Opa, we're trying in that, and yet trying in that, and go to Kakan, they had the cuts on and yet a mime, I think my cuts you. You can not choose from here to shift Kamasha. Ramish Kamasha, I Mumoya, Yehu Kaya Chakwe, Muhu to the ear trans, Ma, you got some new shots here. Listen, kind of touches you. You hear little kids talk. Now I, when class man, try out and see. Mohammed?
Just real briefly.
Ed's going to make a couple comments here, and then I'm going to ask if there's any final questions, and I'm going to start wrapping it up. So, well, Ed, and then her, and then we'll start wrapping it up.
Just real briefly, I use this to sing with, but not to talk into. The thing is that, just real briefly, is that, some of the days when you think about it, how many of you guys went to boarding schools back in the early days? There's some boarding school kids here. And again, way back then, it was already about taking the native out of us back then, taking the native out of the people who went to those boarding schools. Though there was education, yes, but then it already kind of took us away from our belonging, who we belong to. Those are some of the things that already happened back in the days. So again, those are some of the things. I know education is very important, and I know council stresses education all the time. And again, it goes back again to also, again, some of the things we talked about. Who's going to be your wife? Who's going to be your husband? Those are challenges that already happened back then. I too, myself, married outside of the Laguna tribe as well. Not because my dad and my mom were telling me because you relate to this and this. That was my choice back then. My wife is from Hamas. She started to learn the language because she's hearing it here and there. I don't always speak it, and she's always after me for that as well. Like somebody said, why every day in and day out. And that's what I'm told at home as well. Now my grandkids are starting to learn the language, but they're learning it at school. Somewhat, what's being taught to them. Now the schools are bringing these things up, and those are some of the things from the council as well as a directive to start having our language being taught in schools. And it's being stressed very highly. I attempt to do that at the Head Start level, but when I get home, sometimes I forget at home. So my wife is always asking me for that as well. But right now, my grandkids, they're starting to speak and learn. My kids, fluent in Hamas, very fluent. But they're also speaking Laguna. They're learning to speak it. So again, I was just making sure I want to capture this as well. So you're saying that, I just want to make sure that we capture this. Are you saying that you want language to be as an identifier as to who we belong? Or is there, because a lot of it has been to focus around language. So I want to make sure I capture this right. Is it, you want to use language as an identifier to what our work is about? Am I correct in that? Somewhat? Part of it? Okay. I just want to make sure I capture that correctly. because those are some of the things that we're going to also be working on, because we were asked about strategies out at in Barstow, but are your strategies to do these things again, to move forward. So I just want to make sure I capture that right. So somewhat language could be a part of an identifier as who we belong. No. Go on.
Talking about marrying tribal members of your own. My dad, before he left the world, he told me it was kind of funny because some of my classmates were chasing after me in high school, and I told them, I said, "Oh, what's your clan?" And they told me, I said, "Oh, I can't. Sorry, you're my brother, or you're my sister." So, but anyway, to make this faster, I have a fiance, which I'm not married yet to, but also somebody else before him, and they're from Dulce. But I had a daughter, and but she passed, but she was half Laguna, and she was enrolled down here. And my dad was always telling us kids to marry your own tribe. But the thing that's like what everybody's saying, where the clan moves in, you know, it's like I was kind of scared because, you know, we're all clan related on the reservation here. And I told him, I asked my dad, is that going to affect my marriage if I do marry somebody on my tribal land? He goes, well, you got to ask them if you're a clan or not to them. And then I told him, I said, well, how do I? He told me about just ask them. So I said, okay. So then I decided, so no, so I'll just wait off a marriage for maybe forever. So far I haven't gotten married. I can't make my choice on that. Well, I'm over the hill already, but but I'm still planning for years to come. I'm still looking forward to it, but slowly at a time, not in a hurry. And well, that's all I was concerned about is my clan side, who I'm related to and who I'm not. But I'm glad to be here at this conference here. I heard some good words about all you people here. It just wakes me up to hear all this, which I never heard. You know, our tribal members talk strongly about this, and I feel strongly about what all the words were said here. Me as a full-blooded, and I'm really happy to come here today to see all this and hear all this. So
my name is Valerie Macero. I come from the village of Masita. I live in New Laguna. I have my daughter here, Sancha Mabayo. She's part Laguna, part Acoma. She is registered here in Laguna. You know, talking about the language and everything, all this, and it's, you know, I'm considered a millennial, you know, and to me, a lot of the millennial, you know, people around my age, you know, I'm gonna say we got lazy. You know, we got lazy with the language. We got, you know, technology has, you know, taken over, you know, a lot of our lives, and that's, you know, a lot of us have to depend on it. And, you know, we need to go back to how things were, because, like, you know, a lot of my conversations are, like, with my staff. I do work with the CHR program here in Laguna. And, you know, when we're at lunch, we talk about how it was back in the day when, you know, when we were little. You know, I remember we didn't have phones, we didn't have laptops, we didn't have, you know, iPads, anything like that way back then. And, you know, we were outside. And, you know, my daughter here, one day we were driving around, she's like, what kind of iPad did you guys, what kind of phones did you guys have when you were little? And I was like, you know, we didn't have any of this stuff. And I think, you know, this technology now, you know, it got us lazy. It took us away from what we should be learning, you know, with our, you know, with our people, even our traditions, you know, and it's, to me, it's sad. You know, I wish we could go back to how things were, you know, in our home. You know, yeah, we all have phones, but, you know, I make time for my kids. You know, we sit at the table, you know, no phones at the table. You know, my youngest son, he does give me a hard time about it, but, you know, because he has a tablet, and it's just, you know, I think, you know, my generation, I think we got lazy with, you know, why we don't speak the language. You know, I understand some of it, but not all of it. I do speak a tiny little bit, but not, you know, not what I want. I do have clients in the community who I help health-wise, and, you know, I do have this one individual client who is, he's maybe a few years older than I am, and he knows the language really well. And, you know, I take him to appointments, and we talk, and I already told him, I said, when we're in my vehicle, I said, can you teach me? So, you know, that's my lesson. That's my lesson from him. You know, he teaches me the language, you know, and yes, it is, you know, kind of a tongue twister. But I try my best, and he corrects me, you know, and I tell him, how come you don't, you know, how come you don't go to your community and, you know, teach it? And he goes, well, I have to do drug tests, I have to do background, you know. I was like, well, why don't you just go to your, you know, merumas and say, hey, can I use the community center? Just put up your own class. You don't have to go through, you know, the tribals, you know, their thing. You know, he does reside in Hawaii. He does participate in the traditions, the ceremonies. And, you know, he has no kids. He just has a bunch of nieces and nephews, but he talks to them in their language, and something that I wish I could do with my children. But, you know, now, you know, we've gotten lazy, and it's, you know, to me it's sad. You know, I'm guilty of it. But I think that, I mean, me and my daughter just now here, you know, after hearing one of the gentlemen up here saying when he teaches the language class, right away we went to each other, hey Mom, let's go. She wants to go, you know, so I think that's something that, you know, I try to, you know, what my kids want to do, you know, then I'm for it. You know, I'll encourage them, I'll be there right by them, you know. We were reminded of this session, and, you know, for the young people, and she said she wanted to come, so, you know, I said, all right, you know, I don't give her a hard time about it, you know, I encourage her, you know, I'm asking her constantly, do you understand what they're saying? She said yes, but, you know, we need to encourage, you know, our people, you know, we need to encourage them, not discourage them. But anyways, I hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and looking forward to talking to, you know, some individuals. I see some of my elders here, so thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. So I'm going to just close up some comments here, and then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll go into the second piece of the presentation. And this is, you know, again, where we need your feedback or the suggestion that we're wanting to provide to you. And then we also have lunch ordered for all of you as well, so lunch will be here also. So just to maybe kind of capture or summarize the comments you've heard so far, a lot of it around language, you know, which is, I think, very important because it is an identifier, you know, on language. One of the things that I would also encourage us to not forget about is, you know, we have also community members, tribal members. A few years ago, when I was serving, we took a group of young students with us to DC to kind of show them the process of, you know, when we go lobby and all those kind of things. And it was going to be part of the National Congress of American Indians conference. And the young people were going to make a presentation. And so where I was asking, what do you guys want to present on? And let's put together your presentation. And so we went through this whole process. One of the young ladies, she was sitting there and she was pretty quiet. Normally she's pretty vocal, in a good way, throwing out ideas and things like that. But in this particular conversation, she was very quiet. So I asked her, I finally snapped and I asked her, is something wrong? Are you okay? Why are you not contributing to the conversation? And it was, the project was talking about our customs and how we should be as Native people, and the young people are very proud to talk about Yolguni. And language and all of that was all part of it. And so her response was that, she said, Governor, our family, we've grown up, we go to church, we pray, we do, she explained her life. She said, but we don't practice at the Kiva. That's not our belief. I've not learned the language. My parents don't know the language. But I'm still Laguna. So we can't forget about our young people like that too. And so as we think through this and we go into the future, this conversation is so very critical because it's going to help us define how we identify. Do we identify as being Laguna only on paper? Or do we identify here? And how do we do that? And one of the examples, I don't know, you may have come across, maybe you read it. There's a book called Pueblo Railroad. It's really interesting. It talks about what it does is it juxtaposes, it compares Santo Domingo Pueblo and Laguna Pueblo. And what the comparison is on sovereignty and how the two tribes exercised sovereignty when the railroad was coming through our respective lands. The railroad wanted to do the same thing in both pueblos, right? Run their track right through the pueblo. And here's the benefits, here's what you can do, so on and so forth. Santo Domingo Pueblo used their sovereignty to protect their way of life. They didn't ask for money, they didn't ask for all these kind of things. Laguna, on the other hand, used the sovereignty for job creation, for homes, for all that kind of stuff. Leapfrog to today, Santo Domingo is still very strong and vibrant in their language, in their traditions. They don't have a lot of economic activity. They don't have a lot of money, but they got language. They got culture. You look at us, we're very strong economically, financially, education, but our language is so very fragile. So the price we've paid, we need to rethink what that means. So as we talk about language as an identifier, the decisions that were made way back when none of us were even a light in anybody's eye, that were made, impact us today. That's why this conversation is very similar to what happened in 1885 when they did the Flower of Friendship and allowed the railroad to come through. When you then look 200 years down the road, what are the decisions that we're going to be making over the next couple of years? What impact is that going to have? So it becomes really, really critical. The other piece is that in this next phase, we'll touch on the systems that we already have in place. One of them, I think Pauline and a couple others mentioned it, is the clan system. A system that already identifies how we belong. But have we devalued that system? And so it becomes critical to make sure that we find ways to incorporate that back in. And I want to echo what Valerie said, when it comes to the younger people, that we don't discourage them, but we encourage them. Because I think whether a generation got lazy or not, again, it goes back to it's everybody's responsibility. Because one of the things we think, I agree with her in how technology has impacted us. When we use our cell phones, it's instant gratification. If I text Anaya, I'm going to expect that she's going to text me back here in a couple seconds. We've created that expectation. But when we think about language is a lifelong learning. You're not going to get it in a couple seconds. It's going to take a lifetime to learn. I even hear some of our fluent speakers that say, I still mess up, I'm still learning. So it's a lifelong education in that part. So I don't think there's anybody to blame, but that doesn't relieve us of our responsibility. We all have responsibility to this. I was asking Barbara a little while ago because of one of the comments of the 4-4s and all those that element of our membership. So in the last 10 years, there's been less than 5 people that have been enrolled as 4-4s. Think about that. In the last 10 years, less than 4 to 5 people have been enrolled. And enrollment comes in every quarter. So there's not a lot of 4-4s. And when you look even historically, again, that history we showed, prior to 1940, it was just 1/2 Indian. So precedent has already been set. There was no qualifier as Laguna blood. So how you qualify Laguna blood, I don't know. But when you even go further back, right, with the Mexican Entrada, the Spanish Entrada, and we're not unique in Laguna. Many of our people, one of the articles you have there talks about slavery and how some of our people were put into slavery because the conquistadors, they didn't bring women. Right? So there's a huge influx of Spanish. Right? So those are things that we need to be thinking about. But what's so very important about this process is that we're not here, and we've worked very hard to make sure, again, making this environment safe. We're not here to dissect who's 4-4s or 1/4 or whatnot. We're here to find ways to be inclusive of everybody. At the end of the day, you're just Laguna. You're not a regular member or a naturalized, you're just Laguna. Right? So that's the goal that we're working towards. The last comment is, again, on the language. This has been interesting because I think as a group we've always felt that language is an important part of this. It is an identifier. When you think about lineage and how things are descended or passed down, we're an oral society. So it makes sense that lineage is a part of the identifier. Language is a part of the identifier. And I think one of the ways is just, maybe in this instance as we go forward, of just using it. That begins that process of identifying. I was thinking about, when we go out to Zuni, my aunts out there, like I said, growing up, that's all I heard when we were out there. And to this day, when we go out there, one of my aunts in particular, she rarely talks English to me, but I don't understand some of what she's saying anymore. But every time, walk in the house there, and they acknowledge me in that way. That's how they talk to me. So some of those things don't leave you. Greet you, you're still Zuni. That's what they tell me. So I think those are important things to just use it. It doesn't take money, it's free. It's free. So I would encourage that we try to use that as we go down this path. So with that, these have been really great comments that you shared with us this morning so far. So I hope it was a good refresher for those of you that were there in November, but for those that are new today, I hope it helps set the stage for this next part, because this next part is going to be important as we get your feedback going forward on the model that we're suggesting that we utilize. We have a couple different models, just to kind of give you a quick excerpt of what's coming up. We'll give you some history of why we think lineage is the best model for belonging. We'll give you some feedback from the conference, what some of the surveys said. If you recall, those of you that were there, you filled out some surveys, and some of your comments we extracted. Oh my God, some people put some really deep thought into the comments. So we're going to share some of those. Then we're going to share with you why we think the belonging, the lineage model is the best model for us. We'll show you a couple models that we've looked at in other tribes. And then we'll allow for a little bit of conversation with all of you so that you can kind of reflect on what we share. And then we'll do our breakout session. So that'll wrap up our day. So we want to make sure we try to get out of here no later than 2 o'clock. That's what we're scheduled. So we want to be respectful to all your time because you've taken time to be here with us. So we want to make the best use of your time and get you back to your day as best as we can. So with that, let's take a quick 5-minute break. Bathrooms are this side. If you're not familiar with it, the bathrooms are this side. And then let's reconvene here at 11:15.
Filmou?